Good morning. I know what you're thinking. Another summit, another talk on PERS reform, and so little to show for it. But we've actually learned a lot of lessons over the last several years that can help us turn talk into action. And I'm pleased to be able to share those with you today. But first, a little context. In 2013, then Governor John Kitzhaber worked with the legislature to enact a package of PERS reforms that saved the state, cities, counties, and school districts some $5 billion and set the stage for the best boost to K-12 funding in more than a decade. But then, 2 years later, the Oregon Supreme Court undid most of his reforms. And when Kitzhaber had signed the legislation, he said, "I'm done with PERS." Now we've learned PERS is not done with us. And by we and us, I mean all Oregonians. And what we're facing now is a fairly daunting prospect. Let me share some of this with you in the form of these charts. For 40 years, the average cost of PERS borne by public employers was about 12% of payroll. Now it's 21%, headed to 25% next July, and likely to exceed 30% in a few years thereafter. That takes a big bite out of public budgets. It also takes a big bite out of taxpayers, because at the start of this decade, the average Oregon household saw about $600 of their taxes and fees go to support PERS. Now it's over $1,200 and likely to rise above $2,000 within a few years hence. So if you add it all up, over the next 8 years, PERS will consume about $9 billion in additional revenues from our cities, counties, special districts, and schools. And for K-12, by 2023, the impact will amount to the equivalent of 5,000 teachers or 18 school days. Now, there's really nothing that our school districts, our city councils, our county commissions can do to solve this problem. Nor can they refuse to pay the bills that PERS is delivering to their budgets and their services. It's really now up to the governor and the legislature to take on this problem. So what should they do? What can they do? And what's our role in all this? Well, the Supreme Court ruled in 2015 and clarified that benefits earned to date must be protected, but benefits yet to be earned and how we pay for them can be changed, provided we do so on a going forward basis. So we now have a clear legal path forward to a PERS reform if we choose to take it. But that doesn't mean we should. I mean, after all, most of the liabilities in the system are due to those benefits already earned by those already retired. So why talk about changing things for those in the current workforce? Well, a couple of reasons. PERS has a target for its retirement system, providing 50% of final salary for a career employee after 30 years of employment, plus Social Security. That's a generous benefit, but it's not unaffordable. What makes it unaffordable is when the payouts from the system exceed that target. And that's been the case for the last 30 years and will continue to be the case even for current workers. Further, it's the practice in most public pension systems around the country that employers contribute 6% to support their benefits. But that's not the case in Oregon any longer. The employee's 6% contribution now goes to a separate supplemental retirement savings plan. So employers and taxpayers bear the full cost of the pension plan. Now, I don't want to imply that public employees are gaming the system. This is not their fault. Mistakes were made that generated higher payouts and these cost shifts that I mentioned. And it's human nature when mistakes are made in your favor to feel like you deserve them. And that's certainly the case when, in this case, it feels like a kind of karmic redress for sacrifices made in the past. But then we got to look to the future. We did that when we convened a focus group of public employees on 2 separate occasions last summer and shared with them the same facts we've just shared with you. Turns out they're very concerned about the impact of PERS costs on their jobs. They're very concerned about the impact on their families. And they're willing to be part of the solution, and even offered ideas for how they'd like to have more choices, a more modern retirement system that gives them choices better suited to their retirement needs and preferences. So that's the second lesson. We've generated a lot of ideas in these conversations. We have these ideas on the table. We'll be talking about them in our breakout this afternoon. But the lesson is this, that we can reduce PERS costs going forward without retreating to substandard retirement benefits for public employees. Next, whose agenda is this? Why is the business community leading on PERS reform? You know, in this time of blue teams and red teams and conflicts between business and labor, there's rampant suspicion about hidden agendas on both sides of that divide. So it's important to remind our friends in the public sector that we're not talking about PERS reform in order to back money out of public budgets. We're talking about PERS reform so we can redirect savings to add back school days, boost entry-level salaries for a new generation of teachers, reduce class sizes, and stem the rising trend of tuition in our community colleges and universities. This third lesson has been lost, I think, and sometimes misconstrued in the partisan debates of the last several years. Next, we have to climb this mountain and take a long look at the horizon. Because even if we succeed in enacting the kind of reforms I've been discussing, we're still going to save at most maybe $5 or $6 billion, about the same amount that the Kitsabra 2013 package would have saved. That means we'll be left with $16 or $17 billion in unfunded liabilities. Those are a legacy cost. And legacy costs are a monster that preys on our future. So we can stay the course, let that monster claim larger shares of public budgets going forward, but doing so will mean that we'll be shifting the costs of the past to kids in today's classrooms. Think of the class of that high school class of 2025. We've set the goal of 100% graduation rate. In the class of 2026, 2027, all the way through the classes of the 2030s, they'll pay the steepest price of all. So the question becomes, if we can get costs under control, we still have to deal with those legacy costs. Is there a way to do that? That doesn't involve just kicking the can down the road, but also doesn't mean kicking to the side of the road a whole generation of Oregonians whose education will otherwise be compromised and whose social supports will be stretched to the breaking point. The governor started this conversation with her UAL task force a year ago. There's a lot more to be learned, a lot more to be discussed, and a lot more to be done in this regard, but we're not going to do it if we don't get these costs of PERS under control. Lastly, did I hear mention this morning of tax reform? Yes, PERS reform is hard, tax reform is hard, and trying to do both at once may be more than twice as hard. But that's the imperative we face now. Because without reform, PERS has dibs on all new revenue and may consume it all. With reform, we get a clear path forward for tax reform and doing more with more. But I think so those are the 5 lessons that I wanted to share with you today. But I think there's an overriding lesson we should keep in mind. We've been deadlocked on this issue for years now, both sides wielding veto power in a long-running contest of wills. But there's one constituency that should be able to override our vetoes. They're not in this room, they're in our classrooms. And if we keep their interests in mind, the interests of our kids and grandkids, and practice what we teach in our classrooms about correcting our mistakes, I think we can get beyond talk and start making some progress. So what do we need from you? We need your engagement, your ideas, and your demands. And I say that because for the number of times that lawmakers and union leaders have whispered in my ear, we need PERS reform, maybe now they'll start listening and appreciating the ideas and acting on our demands. So I hope if you're interested, you'll join us at our workshop this afternoon, because we all have to work together to get this done. Thank you very much.